In the humid, heavy air of Benin City, history does not just sit in textbooks. It breathes, it sits, and occasionally it bites. For the puritanical monarchists of the Benin Kingdom, the name Obaseki has always been a jagged pill to swallow, a name synonymous with one 27-year-old shadow that refuses to dissipate. The recent humiliation of Don Pedro Obaseki and his forceful quote-unquote arrest to the palace was not merely about a modern political spat. It was the climax of a century-old ghost story, a modern reckoning for an ancient grievance. The original scene, the ghost of Agho. To understand the rage in the eyes of the palace loyalists who intercepted Don Pedro, one must look back to 1897, when the British Punitive Expedition sacked Benin and sent Oba Ovonramwen into the lonely midst of Calabar. The throne sat empty. In that void stepped Agho Obaseki. Agho was a man of cold deficiency and a former close associate of the Oba, but in the wake of the invasion, he became the British darling. For 17 years, 1897 to 1914, he ruled as the British-backed paramount chief, serving as the de facto head of the native council. When Oba Ovonramwen died in 1914, the British attempted the unthinkable. They considered installing Agho as the new Oba by passing the sacred law of primogeniture. Though Prince Agho Obaseki was eventually crowned as Oba Ewuare II, the British forced him to accept Agho as his Iyase, Prime Minister. Supported by colonial bayonets, Agho Obaseki overshadowed the king, stripping the monarchy of its executive power and reducing the Oba to a glorified puppet. This interregnum trauma became a permanent scar on the Benin psyche. The MOWAA story, a modern palace coup. In 2024, the quote-unquote Obaseki shadow returned in the form of a former Governor Godwin Obaseki to the palace of Oba Ewuare II. The governor's tenure felt like a digital age reenactment of Agho's reign. The flashpoint was the MOWAA, Museum of West Africa Art. While the world celebrated the return of the Benin Bronzes, a domestic war erupted over who would hold them. The Oba insisted on a Benin Royal Museum within the palace grounds, asserting that artifacts stolen from the king must return to the king. Governor Obaseki, however, through state support and international funding behind MOWAA, a private, trust-led institution. To the monarchists, MOWAA was not a museum. It was a quote-unquote palace coup in stone and mortar. It was seen as an attempt to secularize the sacred heritage of Benin and place it under the control of a government trust led by an Obaseki, thereby denying the Oba his rightful role as the custodian of the kingdom's soul. To remark, Edo Atopae. The tension reached a boiling point in London Amid the high-stakes diplomacy of artifact restitution, Don Pedro Obaseki allegedly uttered a phrase that would be his undoing. Edo atopae, long live Edo. To an outsider, it sounds like harmless patriotism. To a Benin Puritan, it was a linguistic declaration of war. The sacred greeting is Oba atopae, long live the king. By substituting Edo, the state, for the Oba, Don Pedro was accused of trying to decouple the people from the monarchy. The exact administrative goal his ancestor Agho had pursued under British patronage. The reckoning and the cost of barbarism. When Don Pedro returned to Benin City, he didn't just walk into a street, he walked into a century of repressed resentment. The disruption of the MOWAA preview was the era. His abduction from a football field was the strike. He was ambushed, stripped to his boxers, and forced to crawl on his knees through the dust toward the palace gates. In the eyes of the mob, they were arresting a descendant of Agho to finally make him bow where his ancestor had stood tall. They called him an Ogyonoba, an enemy of the king. However, as the dust settles, a darker truth emerges. While the historical tensions between the Obaseki family and the palace are deep and complex, the transition from historical grievance to physical battery marks a dangerous collapse of order. In a civilized society, no amount of disrespect or linguistic slip-up justifies the stripping and public degradation of a citizen. The spectacle of a man being forced to crawl in 2025 is a reminder that when history is used as a weapon rather than a lesson, it does not preserve culture, it consumes it. Such barbarism has no place in the modern Edo state, where the rule of law must be the ultimate paramount chief, ensuring that the grievances of 1897 are settled in the halls of intellect and tradition, not through the violence of the street.